Hey, welcome back to the channel. I'm Two Commas, and today we're going to be talking about deuce to seven triple draw. Now, I've already put a video out on how to play Badoogie and also how to play ace to five triple draw, but I would be remiss if I didn't do a video on deuce to seven because, as I like to think, these are the three games in the low ball series that you just have to know how to play, the trifecta, if you will. And it's one of my favorite games to play. I did well in the WSOP last year. I cashed in it, and I often cash in the triple draw mixed games that includes deuce to seven. I've played 3 tournaments at the Golden Nugget in the triple draw mix and have made the final table twice. And the year I didn't make the final table, I actually found out I had COVID. So I was basically sleeping at the table. But anyway, it's one of my favorite games to play. You have to know how to play it if you're going to play mixed cash games. It is a prerequisite in order to sit down at a mixed cash game for poker. And I think that you're going to have a lot of fun learning about it. And we're going to go ahead and dive right in. But before we do, if you've gotten any value out of the videos on this channel, or if you want to learn more, please do me a favor, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit your best friend just because it really helps the channel out and will allow us to continue to make videos that talk about our mixed game experience in the poker world. All right, let's go. So the first things you need to know about deuce to seven triple draw is, as the name implies, it is a triple draw game. So just like ace to five, just like Badoogie, you're going to have 3 chances to make your hand. You're going to be dealt 5 cards face down. They're your cards only. No one else gets them. It is played just like Hold'em. You're going to have a button and you're going to have a small blind and a big blind. There's normally only 6 players at a table. Sometimes they'll play 7, sometimes they'll play 8, but normally it's a 6-handed game. I don't really like playing with too many people in the game, and sometimes if you're playing 8-handed, they'll have one player sit out that moves around as the button moves around. But it is a 6-handed game normally. And as the name implies, the best hand is going to be containing a deuce. The deuce is very important and you never want to leave home without it. It's just like American Express. So always remember that you have to have a deuce in order to continue in the hand until you become a pro's pro, and then you'll know when that rule doesn't apply to you. But if you're just starting out, do not play hands that don't contain a deuce. The deuce is easily the most important card in the deck, and there's only 4 of them, so if you have one, you have an advantage. Another reason why you want to make sure that you have a deuce in your hand is because you can't make a 7 low without a deuce in your hand. And remember, when you are determining what the best hand is in a low ball game, you start from the top. So 7 is going to be on the lower end of the scale. 7, 5, 4, 3 deuce, 7, 6, 4, 3 deuce, 7, 6, 5, 3 deuce. All of the 7s are going to be really strong premium hands, and you cannot make a 7 without a deuce in your hand. So you're going to be prevented from getting some of the best hands if you don't have a deuce. So the nuts in deuce to 7, or the wheel as we like to call it, is 2, 3, 4, 5, 7. And that is going to be the best possible hand you can get, and there's a reason for that. Sometimes people get confused by the fact that it's 2, 3, 4, 5, 7. They're like, why would that be the best hand? And that's because that is the worst possible hand you could get if you were playing normal poker, and you would always lose against anyone else, right? Because in ace to 5, ace 2, 3, 4, 5 actually makes a straight. And if you had 2, 3, 4, 5, 7, because you don't have the 6, you don't have a straight. Also, you can't have a flush in deuce to 7. So you need to have at least one card being a different suit than the rest of your cards. So that's the origin of how deuce to 7 came about and why it is considered to be the purest form of low ball poker. And similar to other mixed cash games, you're normally going to be playing in a limit format, which again means that you're going to have 2 denominations that you're betting in. for the first 2 rounds and then for the second 2 rounds. So if you're playing 40-80, then that means after the cards are dealt, you're going to be betting in increments of $40. So $40 would be the big blind, a raise would then be $80, another raise would then be $120. And then after the first draw, you're still betting in denominations of 40. And then after the second draw, you're now betting in denominations of $80. And after the last draw, you're also betting in denomination of $80. It can get quite expensive, but the rules apply to any limit you're playing, whether it's 8-16, 20-40, 40-80, 80-160, it's the same, just the denomination changes. So let's talk about strategy a little bit and how you can really have some fun and increase your profitability when playing deuce to seven. So as always in poker, it's position, position, position. It never changes in poker. The better your position, with the button being the best, then the more information you're gonna have, and that just gives you an advantage over the other players at the table. So always make sure that you're playing in position. When playing, you're gonna have to consider what your opening ranges are gonna be. Obviously, the best opening range is when you have a pat hand already, meaning that you don't have to draw any cards. That's what pat means. You don't need to draw any more cards. And so your opening range that starts with a pat hand, normally a pat 8 or better, is going to be a hand that you want to continue with. So for example, maybe you have 8, 6, 5, 3 deuce. That's a pat hand, and you would want to stay in the hand and continue without drawing cards. A pat 8 without a deuce is probably the only exception to playing without a deuce. So if you had 8, 6, 5, 4, 3, you would stay in the hand and continue to bet the whole way, because that's still a really good hand, although it doesn't have a deuce, and you have a probably decent chance of winning. In deuce to seven, you always want to be aiming for an 8. You don't want to aim for higher than an 8, so you don't want to aim for a 9 or a 10. Always an 8 is what you're aiming for. You may end up with a 9 or a 10 by the last draw, but you don't want to start off looking for a 9 hand, right? So when you're dealt cards, if you have 9s or 10s or jacks in them, those are the cards you're going to get rid of, and you're going to be aiming for an 8 low or better. And so when you're taking position into account, remember that the earlier you are in position, meaning the small blind, the big blind, under the gun, you're going to want to have a tighter opening range, meaning your cards need to be better than if you were in late position, in the cutoff or on the button. So from an opening position standpoint, I think you need to be mainly concentrating on 1 card draws to an 8 or better. So if you had 2, 3, 5, 7, that is obviously a hand you would come in with. If you had 2, 3, 4, 8, that is obviously a hand you would come in with. If you're in early position, I would also make sure that you have a deuce. Remember, it's called deuce to seven for a reason, so make sure you have a deuce in your hand when you're playing. As you move further back in the position, and meaning that your position is better, then you have an opportunity to open up your ranges a little bit, and you could play all the way down to even 3 card draws. So you're only keeping 2 cards in your hand. Most of the time when you're playing deuce to seven, people are going to be drawing 2. Okay? That's what most of the draws will consist of. And the best 2 card draws you can have is when you start with 2, 3, 4 or 2, 3, 7. 2, 3, 4 or 2, 3, 7 are the best 2 card draw starting hands you can have. That doesn't mean you're going to win. That doesn't mean you're going to make your hand. In fact, it can be quite frustrating when you start with 2, 3, 4 and you get brick, 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 so many bricks you can build a house. But it happens. The game can be frustrating from time to time. But if you continue to play the percentages and you play with great starting hands like 2, 3, 4, 2, 3, 7, then you're going to be in the long run, a profitable poker player. What you don't want to do when you're playing deuce to seven is play straight draws. Straight draws can be very dangerous, and that's one of the differences between playing ace to five and playing deuce to seven. And the card that is most likely going to get you into trouble from a straight draw perspective is the six. So sixes can be a little dangerous because let's say you start off with 2, 3, 4, 6, right? Well, now you can't draw a five. If you draw a five, you just made a straight, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So now you have a losing hand, right? So now you're only drawing for a 7 or an 8, and a 7 would be an awesome card, but you don't want to only be drawing with one card that could make your hand. And you have to remember that you're playing against other people, and they probably have a 7 in their hand, which is going to reduce the opportunity for you to draw a 7. And then if you draw an 8, maybe an 8 wins, but you just don't want to limit your options when you're trying to draw a card. You want to be able to draw multiple cards and still win the hand, not draw just one card to win the hand. So sixes can be very difficult to play. If you are dealt, let's say, as a starting hand, 2, 3, 4, 6, 9. Some people might think, well, just throw away the 9. Actually, you need to throw away the 9 and the 6. Okay, that would be my preference, and that would be my recommendation on how to move forward in the hand. Do not keep the 6 if it's going to mean that you're drawing to a straight. And since you don't want to be drawn to straights, that means you don't want to start off with cards like 3, 4, 5 or 4, 5, 6. Those hands are just going to get you in trouble in the long run, and you could end up losing a lot of pots. And just like ace to 5, you want to be drawing from the bottom up. That's called drawing smooth, meaning you want to start with hands like 2, 3, 4, and the cards that you need are going to be the higher cards, the 5s, the 6, the 7s. You don't want to start a hand off with 7, 6, 5. Like, that's not what you want to do, because yes, you could draw a 2 and a 3 and make a great hand, but you can also draw an 8 and a 9, and then your hand is 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, and that might as well be a 10, and if you're playing to get a 10, you might as well not be playing deuce to 7. Equities run really close in deuce to 7. And the other thing that I'm going to recommend is that when you come into a pot, you 3-bet, you raise. So you want to get the big blind out is the point. You don't want to leave the big blind with pot odds to stay in the hand with a marginal holding that ends up winning the pot. So if you are on the button, someone has already come in for a raise, the optimal play is not to call. The optimal play is to re-raise, because you want to make it expensive for the big blind to enter the pot. Now, if you're in position, which means pretty much on the button, then you could also come into the pot with just 2 cards that you want to keep, meaning you're going to be drawing 3. I wouldn't do it often, but if you're in position, it could be acceptable. If you have a deuce in your hand and you have another wheel card, preferably a lower one like a 3 or a 4, you could also do it with deuce and a 7. But if you don't have at least 2 wheel cards with one of them being the deuce, then I wouldn't come in no matter what your position. Now, some people will throw away all 5 cards because they're just feeling lucky. Those are the people you want to play against. Those are the people that you're going to get your rent paid with. So don't be one of those people. Play against those people. Now, another thing to think about when you're coming into a pot is you actually want to have starting hands that have pairs in them. And the reason why is because it actually makes your hand stronger if those are cards that other players are going to need. So let's say you have deuce, deuce, 4, 6, 6, right? Well, you've got all those 6s are not, the cards that you really want to keep. You do have 2 cards that could potentially make someone else's hand. Or if you had deuce, 3, 3, 5, 5, you definitely have cards that are going to make someone else's hand. So that's a good time to come in because they're not going to have the opportunity to make their hand. And even if you don't make your hand, it does set you up for the opportunity to snow. And as we talked about before, snowing is another name for bluffing, when you are going to stand pat on your hand and not draw more cards and represent that you have made your hand, although you have not. So an example of when you might want to snow is, let's say you've been dealt deuce, deuce, 4, 6, 6. So you decide to throw away, again, you wouldn't want to keep your sixes in this scenario, but let's just say you're already thinking about snowing. So you're dealt deuce, deuce, 4, 6, 6. You decide to keep the 2, the 4, and the 6, right? And on your first draw, you get another 6 and another 4. Well, now you've had 3 6s, so 75% of the 6s. You've had 2 4s, so 50% of the 4s, and you've got a deuce, right? So you've got a lot of cards that other players may want, and this may be a time to start thinking about a snow. So I would still throw away, in this case, 1 card, and I would throw away either the 4 or the 6. And so on your second draw, and this is assuming that you're trying to snow, on your second draw, it doesn't matter what you get. You're going to bet, and you're going to stand pat after that draw, and you're not going to take any more cards on the third draw. And then you're going to bet again on the third draw to represent a strong hand, and hopefully you get a fold and you're able to take down the pot. Now, it always is dependent on what's happening with the other players. So sometimes you're going to get caught. But again, if you're not getting caught running snows or running bluffs, then you're not doing it enough. So you've got to take a shot every once in a while. It's better to do it when you're in position and you can see how many cards your opponents are taking. But when you have paired cards that are low, it's a good time to think about snowing in deuce to 7. Now, there's a few other important concepts that I think you need to realize when you're playing deuce to 7. The first is that if you are ahead on the draw, meaning you are drawing less cards than your opponents, you should always bet, okay, whether you've made your hand or not. If they're drawing 2 and you're drawing 1, bet. If they're drawing 3 and you're drawing 2, bet. Until they have improved and are at least equaling the number of cards that you're drawing, you should continue to bet because maybe they'll just fold. And remember, in these limit games, single bets matter. So good players should fold before they get to the river if they haven't improved their hand. And whether you've made your hand or not, by applying pressure and betting, you can potentially get them to fold. Another concept that is important to understand in deuce to 7 is when to stay pat on the last draw. And statistically, that is when you have a jack or better hand. Again, equities run close, but if you have a made jack and you're going into the third draw and your opponent is still drawing, so it helps to be in position and know, if you've got a jack or better, you should stay pat. And that's because you are a statistical favorite. So let's look at the example. If you have a jack 8, 7, 6 deuce, then you are actually a favorite over any one card draw. So if your opponent had 7, 4, 3 deuce, you are a favorite 51.7% to 48.3%. So if you have a jack or better going into the last draw and your opponent is still taking one, then that is when you stay pat. Now, it gets even better if you have better than a jack, right? Because let's say you had like a 9, 8, 7, 6 deuce, let's say. Well, if your opponent was drawing to the wheel, they had 7, 4, 3 deuce, you are a 69% favorite, almost 70% favorite, right? To win the hand if they're still drawing one card. If they're drawing more than one card, your odds are probably astronomical of winning. But if they're drawing one card, you are almost a 70% favorite if you have a 9 or better. So the rule of thumb is if you have a jack or better in deuce to 7, you stay pat and hope that your opponent either draws a worse jack than you or pairs their cards, which is likely to happen. Now, speaking of pairing cards on the last draw, it gets into an interesting situation where you're going to find that a lot of people are going to bet the river in an attempt to bluff. And it's a tricky situation because, you know, the pot odds say that any single bet on the river should get called, right? Because You only have to be right every once in a while for it to be a mathematically correct call, right? If you're drawing a card and one of your opponents draws a card and they decide to bet on the river, I would say I would call all the way up to deuces, a pair of deuces, okay? Now, a lot of people may think that's crazy, but I've been playing deuce to seven for a long time, and I've seen people bet the river with a pair of jacks because they just knew that since I was drawing, I might not make my hand either. And if they bet and represent that they made their hand, then it's likely I might fold. So my rule of thumb has been if you make all the way up to a pair of deuces, go ahead and call. I've called with a pair of deuces and won on many occasions. A king, a queen, I would still call with. I think you have a decent chance of winning the pot on occasion because people are going to use that opportunity to try and bluff you. Now, let's say you're out of position and you're drawing one card and your opponent drew one card. If you made worse than a jack, I would check it and then call any bet as long as you have better than twos, a pair of twos. But if you have actually made a 10 or better, I would actually bet for value because I think you're going to be in good position to potentially win the pot if you get called light, as they say, in deuce to seven. So again, if you're out of position, you make a 10 or better, then I would bet for value because I think you have a good chance of winning the pot a decent amount of times. And so that's the basics of how to play deuce to seven triple draw. It is an absolute must game when you're playing in the mix. You will see it all of the time. You have to know how to play it well in order to do well in mixed cash games. And if you're not playing just regular deuce to seven, they're going to probably be playing Badusi, which is going to be a split pot game where you are splitting between deuce to seven and Badugi. So that's why I started with these three videos, Badugi, ace to five, and deuce to seven, because they are the fundamental low ball triple draw games that you have to know how to play in order to play any of the other games in the mix. Going forward, we'll talk a little bit more about some of those other games like Badusi, Badesi, Archie, and the like. We'll talk about Raz Doogie and Super Stud and other games that you'll need to know how to play in the mix. But hopefully you enjoyed this video. Try deuce to seven. Listen, stop playing just hold'em when you go into the poker room. Yes, it may be what you are best at. Yes, it may be what you are most profitable at. But, you know, have a little fun too. Try some different things. You might like it. I think it adds a little bit more variety to your experience and makes it not so monotonous, not so solver based, not so robotic. And it actually made poker fun for me, at least, again. So give it a shot. I hope you liked this video. If you did, do me a favor, hit the subscribe button, hit the like button. I want to keep making these types of videos for you, and we can do that more if we have more subscribers and more people spreading the word about the channel. So thanks for tuning in, and I will see you next time.